Which one is better? Oxygen sensors or fuel trim?
In my recent video, I tried to simplify the diagnostic differences between a narrowband and a wideband oxygen sensor and why we have them. But as many of you know, it is not that simple, and many of you have asked questions and commented. Also, some manufacturers monitor and report the data differently. For example, some report amps instead of volts, and other differences, but they all focus on different things. It is not simple at all. To understand just how confusing it is and how technical they are, watch this YouTube video. Frank explains it very well, and it is very technical. Now, we know that oxygen sensors are the input and the fuel trim is the output. We need to understand both. That brings me to this question. Which one is better, oxygen sensors or fuel trim? So what do I mean by better? Well, I could have said which one is more important, but they are both important. The better question is this: which should you focus on? My recommendation is fuel trim. Why, you ask? Well, that's a good question, and it deserves an answer. Oxygen sensor data is an input. It really doesn't matter if it is a narrowband or wideband sensor, because they are all simply measurements, like feet or meters, pounds or kilograms. They are different, yes, but they are simply measurements. The important thing is what the ECM does with those measurements. The computer can't add or take away air. It can only add or take away fuel. So, which is it doing? Well, oxygen sensors won't tell you that, but fuel trim will. That means I need to ask this question again. Which one is better, short term or long term? Well, I'm glad you asked. My recommendation is long term first and then short term. Well, why, you ask? It's a good question. I've been around for a while. In fact, I've been here before codes. And if you're like me, you can remember having a clear and distinct misfire, but there were no codes stored in the memory. They called that the good old days, right? Did you know that short term does not set codes? Short term is constantly adjusting injector on time to balance the air-fuel mixture. It's supposed to do that. These changes are made a few times every second, but they are not stored in the ECM's memory. So freeze frame is not going to be any help. Normal is not a problem. Normal does not set trouble codes. Remember, driving conditions are always changing, and the computer has to compensate for all of these changes. Normal is good. That's what is supposed to happen. No codes will be set because it's normal. Not normal is bad. Something's wrong. Codes will indicate a problem. Both short-term and long-term add or take away fuel by adjusting the injector on time. But long-term does not change the injector on time directly. It changes the trim strategy. Trim strategy. What in the world is that? Well, it is a plan of action designed to achieve a goal, and that goal is to balance the air-fuel mixture, and balance is stoichiometric 14.7 to 1. This is achieved through what we call fuel mapping. The engineers have considered all of the possibilities and created fuel maps, sometimes referred to as tables. Now, fortunately for us, they have done all the math ahead of time. And the fuel maps look something like this. Notice how 14.7 to 1 appears right in the very middle and at various other points on the map. Remember, long-term fuel trim does not directly change the fuel injector pulse width. Short-term does. Long-term changes the strategy to achieve stoichiometric 14.7 to 1. And the instructions to do that are pre-calculated inside each cell. Notice how many cells there are based on load and RPM changes. Now remember, short-term fuel trim recalculates with every breath of the engine, and it can do that all day long. In fact, it's supposed to. But it is limited to how much of an adjustment it can make, and that limit is 10%. Short-term fuel trim is the ECM trying to balance air-fuel mixture. We call it perfect balance stoichiometric 14.7 to 1. Since it is perfectly balanced, no fuel is added or subtracted, and the percentage is 0. No adjustment is needed. Now, if we have a lean exhaust, the ECM issues a go rich command, and it adds fuel. If we have a rich exhaust, the ECM issues a go lean command, and it starts subtracting fuel. Now remember I said it can do that all day long. In fact, it's supposed to. Well, within limits. And those limits are 10%. So we have a negative or positive 10% limit in this graph. Now, here we have colored in the 10% limit. And any adjustment more or less than 10% exceeds the limits of the short-term fuel trim. And the long-term was going to step in to help. And at this point, the long-term fuel trim changes the strategy. And this strategy changes as needed to gain control and balance the air-fuel mixture. And the short-term fuel trim resets at 0. And it will continue to make adjustments until it reaches its limit of 10% again. Now it's important to note here that long-term fuel trim is not rapid. It usually takes a few seconds to be updated. Remember, it is changing the strategy based on the short-term reaching its limit or its ability to control the balance. Now this all continues until the combined adjustment of both short-term and long-term are above 10%. At this point, the air-fuel mixture is no longer balanced. Let's watch how this works when we slow it down. So as the engine runs and develops a lean condition, the ECM will add 2% to try and enrich the fuel. Now it's going to recalculate. Now since we just added fuel, it's going to be rich, so the ECM is going to subtract fuel. The ECM is going to recalculate. Since we just subtracted fuel, it is going to have to add fuel again in order to achieve balance. Now it recalculates, and it might subtract 7%. Now it recalculates, and we may have to add 8%. Then it recalculates again, and we may need to subtract 9%. Then it recalculates again, and it may add 10%. It will recalculate, and then it may subtract 13%. Now we've gone over the 10% limit. Now the long-term fuel cell has been monitoring all this all the time, but it's not making any strategy changes because it has achieved the 14.7 to 1 stoichiometric balance. Now the short-term resets and starts adjusting again, so we're back to 0%. It's going to continue to recalculate, and unless the problem is gone, it's going to try and add fuel. Now in these recalculations, I am just making some assumptions here. These percentages would always change due to how severe a problem you really had. Now it would set a code and change the strategy. Since it could not maintain balance, it would shift to a different strategy and attempt to achieve the balance of 14.7 to 1 again. It's recalculating over and over again as long as the engine is running. The ECMs do a very good job of managing the air-fuel mixture. And all this recalculating and fuel cell strategy changes go on without even us being aware of it. Usually. But sometimes the PCM can't keep it balanced. And that's when the check engine light comes on making us aware of the fact that it can't keep it balanced. So why long-term fuel trim should be the first data PID that you look at? Well, instead of wondering what to spend your time on or what to check first, if you look at the long-term fuel trim first, you'll know if the PCM is successfully doing its job or struggling to keep the air-fuel mixture balanced. If it is struggling, it will indicate that it is either rich or lean, and we know which side of the struggle we need to focus on. Why is it rich or why is it lean? Short term is not a struggle. This is why it doesn't set a code. It is an adjustment. Long term is a struggle. That struggle is why it sets a code. The code gives us an indication of how severe a problem we have. So be sure to focus on and work to fix what's causing the ECM to struggle with the long-term fuel trim. Focus on why.